Can I give another example of my own here? The Apostle Peter, the most allegedly the senior prince of the apostles, one of Jesus' disciples, and the founder. Jesus said to him, "You are the rock, and on this rock, Kephas is a pun. I will build my church." The first pope, in his first letter, 1 Peter, in the Bible, you can read it for yourself, chapter 2. What does Peter say? Now, this is a man commissioned by Jesus upon whom the church will be built. Who was Jesus? This is what Peter says. I'm not getting into questions of authorship here because I have my own views, but we'll take it as it is. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 18 says this, and this is the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but also those who are harsh. Now, then Peter goes on to offer a theological justification for slavery. A theological justification. He says this, he's writing as a Christian, remember, for it is to your credit if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, where is the credit in that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. When Jesus was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. So you identify your position as a slave with that of Christ, who didn't rebel, who didn't protest, who didn't complain, who suffered willingly for God. This is a very high level bit of theological justification from the New Testament, from the Prince of the Apostles himself. Don't even get me started on the Old Testament, which of course has slavery, and nowhere in the Bible is slavery condemned. Jesus never says it was an evil.
So it's not just that it's not condemned. So this is it's very interesting, because what a lot of modern Christians or liberal theologians and also kind of progressive Muslims would say is they'd say, okay, yes, but Jesus / the Quran, they put us on a trajectory to freedom, right? So they don't say it's wrong, but what they show us a way, and eventually we will arrive at the point of realizing this is wrong.
Trajectory hermeneutics. It's called trajectory hermeneutics. I've heard some Muslims say this. It's also found in Christian theology as well.
Here's the problem with that argument. And by the way, this is the same thing that kind of supporters of slavery, or at least people who didn't buy abolitionist arguments in America, said in like the 1700s and 1800s. They said, listen, why didn't Jesus condemn slavery if it's so wrong? And then people would say, oh, well, it was too disruptive. But people would say, like, look, Jesus was like the Son of God. Are you telling me he couldn't just say like slavery is wrong? He said lots of other things were wrong. He was a very controversial person, right? But he didn't say that. And then this is the even more severe criticism. They said, if slavery is so evil, why did God ever allow it? So someone could say, well, Jesus comes in the New Testament. The New Testament, abrogates the Old Testament. But if slavery is evil throughout space and time, why did God allow it in the Old Testament? How could God allow something that's evil? So there's no response to this argument. There is no response. There's only two things you can say. Either you say it wasn't evil back then, which violates the first maxim that slavery isn't evil throughout space and time. Or you say, yeah, but slavery, that was like more kind of servant. You were like a servant. It wasn't really like American slavery, which violates the second axiom, which is all slavery is slavery.
Yeah.
So you can't follow these three axioms. You have to give in on one of them, right? Now, I want to say this because I think it's appropriate right now, and I don't want to leave the kind of listener hanging or something, right? So how do you resolve this? This is the question. How do you resolve this? Because someone could watch us right now and they'd say, these guys are two atheists sitting around making fun of scripture, which is actually the opposite of the case, right? So what does this mean? My understanding, and I think this is correct, very confident this is correct, right? Which is to say that you have to think about what we mean when we talk about morality. So there are certain, when people talk about slavery as a gross and intrinsic evil throughout space and time, they mean this is like an evil in and of itself. It's a real thing. It's like in the world that this is evil. It's not contextual. It's not because of our culture. It's like, no, this thing in and of itself is evil, right? But there's no moral tradition that we have in humanity that I know of that actually produced that argument. So you could talk about natural law, the idea that humans kind of just using their reason and looking at the world around us, considering our nature, using our mind, we can come to an understanding of what's right and wrong, at least on basic things. That's a natural law argument. Natural law scholars thought slavery was fine, right? So second, you could say, well, what about, okay, you know who's definitely Kant, you know, categorical imperative, just pure reason, totally separated from context and society. Yeah. He must, you know, it can't be that Kantian reason would allow us to think slavery is okay.
Yep.
Kant actually did not have a problem with enslaving people that he thought were sub standard or lower in their capacities than kind of normal Western people.
It's a highly racialized view of the world.
Yeah, Indians, to Native Americans, Africans. He said these people, they actually need slavery to meet their potential. Yeah. Slavery is like helping them. They're like kind of like children, you're helping them. So even Kant, using his own reasoning, did not come to a conclusion that slavery was a categorical intrinsic evil. So what I would say is, and this is in the Islamic tradition, the kind of Ash'ari vast, in fact, even Mu'tazilites, all Muslim theologians that I know of had the same position on this. They said, look, we know slavery is not evil in and of itself because God allowed it. So if God allows it, it can't be evil. Now, what they did say is that it's harmful. They 100% said slavery is harmful. They said slavery is darar. It is harmful. And that's why there are all these, you know, reminders and commandments in the Quran and the Prophet's teachings and Islamic law that you should free your slaves because this is something you should be removing them from. This is emancipation is a major goal. But they said this is harmful, but it was just part of life. Like it was like, you know, and this is how human beings prior to the sort of 1700s, 1800s thought of slavery to begin with, which is it's just part of life. Like it's like, you know, bad weather, or it's like sometimes you get sick. Sometimes, you know, you have a bad job, right? It's just it's sort of like a reality of the world you're in. And this is very important. All civilizations that we know of had something basically like slavery. Almost every society that we know of in history had something we could say is sort of like slavery or something like that, right? No society prior to the 1800s actually abolished slavery as an institution. In fact, no one even proposed that